Welcome to the Rainmaker Podcast, where we elevate marketing leaders inside and out. I'm your host, Veronica Rami, master marketer, executive leader, and mentor to ambitious marketing leaders wanting to advance their careers. Each episode is filled with genuine, unscripted conversations with some of the world's top marketing experts, accomplished leaders, and industry trailblazers representing brands, both large and small. Our goal with this podcast and everything we do is to help you master your role, nurture your team, prioritize your well-being, and evolve into an industry-leading rainmaker. This is the Rainmaker Podcast. Oh, guys, I have a really special podcast episode for you today. I am so honored to introduce to you one of the most influential marketing leaders in the world. You can't talk about Seth Godin, Gary Vee, without also mentioning the name Mitch Joel. He's an investor, author, speaker, podcaster, and the co-founder of Thinkers One and a self-proclaimed decoder of the future. He's been in the game for over 3 decades of experience, and he often is speaking in front of groups like Google, Walmart, Starbucks, Shopify, Microsoft, TikTok, Procter & Gamble, and literally every organization and association in between. I was honored to have Mitch on the podcast to discuss what's been heavy on the minds of marketers. We talked about what it's like to market in this really fast-paced, current poly-crisis world with some of the strangest consumer behaviors we've seen ever. We also talked about the strategy behind his personal brand, how he was able to achieve some of the greatest accolades you can imagine, choosing to be a thought leader over a celebrity and the distinction between the two, differentiating your identity from your personal brand, and the importance of having a unique perspective and a unique niche. So let's dive right in and make it rain with Mitch Joel. Welcome, Mitch, to the Rainmaker Podcast.
Happy to be here, Veronica. Thanks for the invite.
Okay, so you are easily one of the most prolific marketers, and you have been front row to a lot of the different tides that our beautiful consumers have been through. I have the honor of working with a lot of marketing leaders who are struggling, not just in their careers, but also to make sure that their marketing is uber relevant to the consumer of today. And it's overwhelming between disruptive technologies, between economy pinching, a number of things. Like you turn on the TV, you're scared out of your mind. From your perspective, because you've seen it all for a really long time, how would you describe the market today versus what it was just 6 months ago, a year ago? Like, what is your take on what's happening right now?
It's tenuous. We're definitely in what they're calling a polycrisis, which is very concerning. You have multiple crises happening at multiple fronts that leaves everyone feeling a certain degree of uncertainty and scare and worry. But at the same time, we have a very strange economy where people seem very eager to go out there and spend and go crazy. And if you think about that from a marketing perspective, it can be really challenging because we're used to having, one or two unknowns and then thinking about how we're going to navigate that and communicate that. And we are suddenly faced with this world where it seems like everything is falling apart, but at the same time, you have consumers doing things that we didn't see them doing pre-pandemic. I don't know if you were reading a lot or following the retail space, but we've been seeing these diatribes about the end of retail and the end of people going to shopping malls and the end of people going to movie theaters and you have this crisis where this global pandemic where people are essentially at home changing their behaviors 100%. Over a long period of time. And we could talk about things like pent-up demand and our need to connect and our need to be in community and see one another. I think all of those are true. But the habits by which we have now engaged in are the habits that we thought were dying before the pandemic. I don't know if you've been to a shopping mall lately. It's pretty busy. Planes are busier than ever. And this is coming at a time when things are more expensive than ever, more challenging to find. There's distribution problems, there's supply chain problems, all of that coupled with just general pricing. I don't know what your basket is looking like, but my baskets are extremely expensive in this world. I'll often spend time speaking to my peers saying things like, how can people afford to do these things? And yet I can't get a parking spot at the airport when I want to fly somewhere for a speaking engagement.
Yeah, I'm actually, many thoughts are going through my mind because I was recently talking to a marketer from the real estate industry. And so when you talk to mortgage brokers right now, at least in the United States, what they're describing is like pent up purchasing power. because no one wants to trade in their 2% mortgage rate for 7.5 and 8% mortgage rate. So like, it's not that discretionary income has evaporated, but there are like head scratching buyer behaviors dependent on the industry that you're talking about, which I think is interesting, right?
Yeah, like I just came off of doing a mortgage event, a
Yep.
speaking event, and up here in Canada, it's very different.
Yeah.
Interest rates are extremely high, mortgage rates are extremely high.
Yeah.
Not easy to get a mortgage, not a lot of inventory. The inventory that's there, it's selling for a much higher price.
Mm-hmm.
People are now buying or spending or waiting because they can't even afford the mortgage, and that's without any type of residential, commercial real estate crash, which could be pending according to
Mm-hmm.
just where we're at in our side of the world. So that also shows you the other side of it, which is we're not seeing it be asymmetrical. It's not asymmetrical at all. And even though we're so close and only a 45-minute drive for me to cross the border into your country, the habits and how even the banking system is working here is very different than what's happening in the States.
Yeah. Well, and I think so. I keep thinking about my poor marketers because like, it is incumbent upon us. It is our responsibility to have a pulse on the prospect, to convert somebody from $0 to $1, to get them across the finish line, to convert them into a customer, right? And there's so many ways to do it, right? There's search marketing, social media marketing, paid marketing, relationship marketing. In a world where we've never been more connected, sometimes we feel we've never been more disconnected. It's frantic. And so when you're looking at your budget allocation as a marketer, right, which is also getting that pinch. So the expectations are higher than ever, more leads, more revenue, more sale, but less people, no backfills, less budget. How does one compete in that arena?
Never been easier, never been harder.
How so?
Well, it's never been easier. We've never been able to access an discernible market in a myriad of ways and technologies and forms than ever before. And at the same time, when everyone is doing that, it's very crowded, it's very noisy. It's a world where we thought we'd go from these three monopolistic like media entities that were very inaccessible and unaffordable to most to a world where we have three or four monopolistic like digital places that are still affordable for sure. And there are other places you can play in, but have similar habits to those old traditional media platforms, but brands can now speak directly to those consumers. They can build those email lists. They can be creative in how they tell their stories and how they create content. And then the paradox of that is when you look at what their actual media spend is, it doesn't look like that in a world where logically we would probably have some type of debate or discourse about this and say, I think logically it makes sense that you split your budget 50% brand storytelling, 50% performance based. But if you look at the actual spend, it's probably closer to 90-10, 90% performance based, 10% brand storytelling. That's going to have problems attached to it. It's going to make that side of the market get increasingly expensive. Search volume is search volume. So suddenly you're spending a lot more to acquire a customer. The cost per acquisition is different. You haven't engaged them in a brand story when you're in more direct response. So because of that, what is that lifetime value of the customer? You're not doing enough on the brand story selling side so that if the brand storytelling isn't there and the pricing on the direct response gets a bit out of control, what do you fall back on? At the opportunity to perform and to do it well and to do all of those things in text, images, audio, video, live, real time, recorded, short form, long form. I mean, that story and that brand opportunity still has never been greater. So I reflect back on my first book, 6 Pixels of Separation, and how optimistic I was about it. And I think the truth is you can be optimistic about it still with this hint of cynicism because both what are we doing on the brand agency side and what is the market pushing to us opportunistically. So even now when you go out and buy something traditional like a Super Bowl ad, you're really not just buying a Super Bowl ad. You're building an entire public relations story behind it. You're doing direct response about it. You're putting out a teaser. Like you're building a campaign around the campaign. So if you were to compare that to a digital only position, well, you've built up all these followers, likes, fans, what audience, whatever you want to call them. Then these large companies start throttling your ability to access them. and suddenly you have to pay to access the audience that has already given you the thumbs up that they want to follow you. These are the same story over and over again. Right? So you're creating marketing content to drive people to the ad or to the it's just the same story over and over again. So that means that when you have a high level of acumen in this industry, and then in the marketing industry, again, it's the best of times, it's the worst of times.
I love all of your paradoxical statements.
I love a good paradox
It's
for
the
sure.
best.
Yeah.
But so is leadership. It's paradoxical. You have to be equal parts
It is,
open,
yeah.
but also, also equal parts certain. It's just good leadership is also paradoxical. But so, okay, one thing that you brought up that I kind of want to piggyback off. I've recently had this conversation with a lot of online CEOs that I service, and in the online digital space, I find that marketing and sales are treated one and the same. So, like on a one-page funnel, you have the persuasive marketing argument, you have the narrative laid out. This is what you want, this is what you're struggling with, this is the new opportunity wrapped in this really beautiful offer, and then buy now. That's all happening transactionally on a one-page experience from a cold ad. So, like in digital marketing companies, they really do treat marketing and sales in the same. And a lot of marketing leaders are being expected to manage both of those divisions as if it was one. In a traditional business, or like my husband works, for example, in a software company that's doing very well right now, they have a more formalized sales division that has the openers and the closers and the BDRs and all the things. And that's separate than Monica Ho as the chief marketing officer and her marketing staff. So you have branding that needs attention, you have the marketing effort that needs attention, then you have sales efforts. Are you seeing a consolidation of these disciplines? Are you seeing a return to more respect to them separately? I'm very curious when you're meeting with these different industries and you're performing these keynotes and you're having these conversations, how they view the difference between marketing's function versus sales function, because it's all revenue generation.
I mean, look, based on that train of thought, it seems like you like paradoxes as
I do
well.
like
So it's
paradoxes.
good to know. I treat them as part of the same.
Okay.
And I believe that the differentiation or the need to keep them siloed or separated is truly dependent on size, tactics, strategy.
Sure.
It's just simple like that. I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do it. I think there are certain scenarios where sales is marketing and marketing is sales.
Mm-hmm.
There's often situations I find where the chief marketing officer is really the chief advertising officer.
Mm-hmm.
So that's more into the tactics versus what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
I've seen people not have marketing departments, but have growth departments. Those growth departments are directly tied to that performance side of things, just directly tied to the sales and how you're going to pull that together. So I don't think there's a catch-all anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that the reason we had them delineated before was because the chief marketing officer really wasn't historically a truly chief marketing officer.
Interesting.
If we even wanted to
Interesting.
agree, which I would, that the 4 Ps are still relevant, I think the 4 Ps are always relevant, right? Product, price, promotion, place. Name me one chief marketing officer that has power over all 4 Ps.
Yeah.
It's really hard to think of any. In fact, we could probably parse them out and find a C-level title for each one of those that has no direct relation to the marketing department as we've historically seen them. So it's a weird thing because I would even argue that prior to the pandemic, and as it rolled through, there was a little bit of this waviness away from the marketing officer and more to the customer officer or experience officer.
Yep.
And I was always lamenting on, is this a way to add to the advertising portfolio? Or are we truly empowering a CMO to hold the power of the product, price, promotion, place? Also, if we study our history, the chief marketing officer role at the C-level is still fairly new. It's a bit of a new industry too.
That's interesting.
So we like these roles, we like these titles, and they're all great. And I think they're powerful and relevant.
Yeah.
But it really is going to be dependent on those 3 things. What is the corporate structure? What is the strategy? And ultimately, what are the tactics? I've seen many places where it's one and the same, but they really do need that sales to be in and of itself because of how they roll in the organization. And also, we haven't even discussed this, but what industry do you serve?
Yeah.
Is it hyper regulated? Is it mostly procurement driven? that's going to change your ability to function as a marketing and sales unit as well.
Yeah. I've been doing a lot of personal research on the fate of the CMO. Because
In a good
again,
way or a bad way.
paradoxical, both.
Yeah.
Yes, and. But because again, I serve a lot of aspiring marketing leaders who are highly ambitious, but also frustrated that they're not further along or they're not getting compensated for what they feel their true contribution is, or there's so much ambiguity of the job titles that are supposed to be before them. And it's like, what should I like chart my course for? So I was researching all of this, like, what is the statistics of those at the top of their game? Because we're all, theoretically chasing the top for ourselves and our individual career paths. Like, what's the statistics? And it was like, there was a study done over 150 different, I think, American corporations that in the last 2 years, they had flipped more than 50% of their CMOs. And historically, CMOs have the shortest tenure of the C-suite and the lowest tenure in the last decade of like their existence. And so it's like some bleak prospects. Do you think that is because of just, is it the ambiguity of like chief revenue officer, chief marketing officer, chief customer experience? I mean, like, heaven's sakes, like there's a lot of fun titles out there. Is it because corporations haven't really figured out how to like set up these leaders for success to have clarity behind the role that they are supposed to master? Like, in sports, like a quarterback's very clear on their position and what they're supposed to do with that thing, right? And then everybody's role revolves around making sure that ball gets across a particular line. In marketing, because the channels are 10x what they used to be, and the complexity of reaching the consumer at the right time with the right message on the right platform, and you have this person who now also has ambiguity in the role that they're supposed to master, is it just kind of a recipe for disaster for them? And like, if that's true, what's the solution for somebody who still wants to achieve the top?
I don't think it is. I would compare it to the tenure of the CEO, CFO, COO. And what you're seeing is a very stark view on that. In fact, I think the last data points I saw, the CEO's tenure was getting pretty close to the CMO's.
They're like, well, a lot of CEOs
So,
have to be marketers.
yeah, I think it's easy to look at our own industry and go, what are all the problems? But have we
Mm.
looked to see the greater challenge, which might just be that we've changed?
Mhm.
We've changed how we're going to run organizations. We've changed how we're going to compensate them. We've changed how we feel we can tell our stories best. I think that this turnstile of leadership has not been helpful to the brand.
Mhm.
That's where I would land on this thought, that ultimately, when I had an agency, which I sold 10 years ago and I left about 5,
Yeah.
I really felt often when there were reviews for the business that we held more institutional knowledge than who was sitting opposite us at the table, which was the brand.
Mm.
I would also submit to the court today that in that moment, it made me angry.
Mm.
It made me angry that the brand didn't understand enough the value of the brand and felt that shifting people is shifting a brand, which is true, but it's bad.
Yeah.
So, bad. What I mean by that is you can adapt and change and redo everything with
Mhm.
your brand, but you cannot deny its legacy. You cannot deny the fact that it has been successful up until a certain point, hopefully in some way, shape, or form. And whatever you're doing, you act as a custodian to the brand versus the owner of the brand. So the analogy I would give you of that, if I don't know where you live, but if you lived in a home that had a lot of historical value or had been there a while, typically it would get some type of grading, at least it does here in Canada, and it limits what you can actually do to it internally and externally. And while that may be frustrating to the current homeowner, the city in and of itself views you as a custodian of the house, not the actual owner, even though you may not have a mortgage and bought it. And I think about that often because it's frustrating when you want to make changes, but at the same time, it holds you to a greater standard of this institution. These 4 walls will be here, hopefully, much longer than you as an individual will be. And so perhaps it allows us as marketers to keep those 6 gun shooters in their holster a little bit. Besides coming in all guns blazing, I'm brought in to be an agent of change and I'm brought in to be a great
Yeah.
disruptor, when it's okay to do those things while also maintaining an understanding of where the brand is and where it will probably go without you, in particular, because yourself and the CFO are unlikely to be there in the next 2 years? And we talk about the cycle of things. And I have a bass podcast where every month I interview bass players.
Yeah.
And one of the conversations that I love having is it's a fairly new instrument. So's the guitar and the grand scheme of violins and harpsichords and other stringed instruments. So what's our role? Our role is that it's easier to innovate because it hasn't been around that long, which means we have a longer road to travel. But it's harder to do on a violin. And so you need to look at the brand and go, do I have an electric bass here or a violin? And what am I trying to bring to it creatively, artistically, to for sure bring it forward? But your ability to bring it forward might be limited by its history and legacy. And I don't mean that in a negative way. That could be very, very powerful. And by the way, we see this because how many brands do we know where the leader comes in and they wind up pulling the nostalgia line? So suddenly they're there to be the great disruptors, and their ability to pull in the history to get nostalgic is what drives it forward, actually. Nostalgia can be good, nostalgia can be bad. It's a separate conversation. So I'm not dismissing your thought. I'm just saying that the tenure tends to be shorter around the world. And maybe the real job is to think about it as a custodial job versus an ownership job.
I love that reframe. I love reframes. I love when my paradigm gets shifted. I love the idea that you are in a position of, like you said, being a custodian of the brand, that the brand came before you and will live after you in your job tenure. We have the same kind of limitations on like historical homes in North Carolina. And when I lived in Boca Raton, we had the Addison Meisner area, and it was like very particular what you could do to the exterior to preserve it. Hey Rainmakers, it's Veronica, and we'll get back to today's episode. But before that, I have an exciting invitation for all of you aspiring, ambitious marketing leaders. If you are serious about advancing your career in marketing and you're looking for an expert to give you some personal insights, guidance, tips, then I'm going to invite you to schedule a free Pathway to Promotion call with me. This is a special one-on-one call with just you and me to discuss your current roadblocks in your career, your long-term aspirations and ambition, and the next best step for you and your personal promotion. Head to pathwaycall.com or click the link in my show notes to schedule your free Pathway to Promotion call. Now back to today's episode. Speaking of brands, let's take a little bit of a shift. A very, very popular topic, or a thing that is highly desirable by our ambitious marketers, is the desire to brand oneself, separate than the brand of the company that you are a custodian for, separate than the brands that you manage in your client portfolio, but like your personal brand as a thought leader, as a marketing expert. And there's a lot of like butterflies. Like, how do I stand out amongst a sea of marketers? Which medium is right for me, whether it's a podcast like you and I both host podcasts. Is it I'm best on stage? I should have my own YouTube channel. Like, there's so much. Receive a lot of mechanical questions of how to brand oneself, and they are too in their own jar to ever see themselves objectively. Like, they can't see read their label through the jar. I'm in awe of your personal brand as a marketing expert, and it shows. Like, you have books, you have podcasts, you've had the notoriety and all the accolades. How intentional were you at the very beginning of this journey when it came to like your personal brand efforts? If I could go back in that room with you, what would the conversation be like? What would be some of the fears and unknowns that you were like, here we go?
They're the same as they are to this day,
Okay.
actually. And I can walk you through it because
Please.
it was very strategic and very decisive. I entered into the digital marketing agency world in about 2000, into an existing business. When I say existing, there were two other business partners and not even a handful of employees. When we sold it, we were multi-office with four partners and 100 plus type, 150 type of employees. And the early days, coming from my background was in music journalism and publishing, I had a lot of access. And so I came in thinking I could knock door to door and tell people why they need a website or need to think about this new thing coming called social media. Or I could pull on my skill set of journalism and thoughtful content and put it out in the world. So I called all the industry publications up here and told them what I wanted to do. And then it was crickets. Like, who are you? You have no clients. What are you doing? But fortuitous timing, luck, and privilege was the beginning of blogging. So suddenly I don't need their permission to share. So now I'm coming out of the gates, all guns blazing, not being the only voice, but one of several at that point, talking about crazy things like internet advertising is going to overtake television spend. What do you know? Website will be one of the most important marketing tools. What are you talking? Absurd things. And the more I wrote and spoke about it back in that time, luck, privilege, timing, the better it would optimize against a lot of these search terms. And so I would mention one of the large associations, I'd mention one of the large publishers, and I would outrank them in one post than they would in their own organic search results. So then I suddenly started getting that attention. And when that attention came, I realized I'm a paid journalist and publisher. They should pay me for that content. And so it became a conversation with my business partners that, okay, we have this new asset now called 6 Pixels of Separation. Back then it was just the Twist Image blog or podcast, which was Twist Image was the name of the agency when we started.
Sure.
And we stood back and said, well, now we have a couple of assets here. We have Twist Image and agency. We have 6 Pixels of Separation, which is a cool name for a blog. So 6 Pixels of Separation, the Twist Image blog or podcast. And we have this character, Mitch Joel. And the conversation was, we're going to manage a portfolio of brands. We're going to manage Twist Image, 6 Pixels, and Mitch Joel.
Okay.
So when I would sit in meetings, it sounds a bit multi-personality disorder, but we would talk about Mitch Joel in the third person. What are we going to do with this asset that is comfortable in front of a camera, comfortable writing, comfortable speaking? And that became, well, we can do some speaking events. We could get involved in the industry association. So we would get involved in councils in the industry association, rise to be the board chair. I say we, but it was me. But it was a planned strategy by the other 3 partners clearing the path, doing the great work so that I could say something that we could then deliver on with a product. That led to book deals and literary agents. That led to expanding beyond the horizons of having an office in Canada, national agency, because my writing was always international and had that flair to it. And so it was a very conscious effort. Now, when I talk about it as a way to answer the question to people who may be struggling with it, I'm very simplistic. Think about the world. I kind of mentioned it earlier, but let's go back to it. Text, images, audio, video, live, recorded, short form, long form. Now add all the platforms in, choose. What is it you can't stop doing? And the truth for me is I don't have a problem recording a new podcast every week. I have enough shows recorded now to get me through. I don't know when this will air, but all the way to March of next year. That's me. I love having these conversations and being able to record them on a platform like Riverside. Love it. Happy to do it. If I have to write 2 or 3 articles a week, my pleasure. There's probably 50 other articles I can't get to. If I have to do a weekly radio hit and then turn that into an audio file and write an article around it, easy. Love to do that. I get invited to speak for client XYZ. They're going to cover expenses and I do it through my speaking bureau. So I get a fee. Happy to do that. And what we quickly discovered is that owning a media company is a very interesting thing to have. In a world where other agencies were competing for clients and all of that business development, as you know, you'll pitch and pitch and pitch and win 1 or 2. That's a deficit of time, right? Because we have a very simple business model as agency owners. We charge for a human unit of time more money than we pay for it. So very basic. Suddenly we're generating revenue in thought leadership, which was unheard of in the advertising agency world. And it was offsetting our business development costs. It was creating a larger platform. Instead of me having to go, hand-to-hand combat, door-to-door, saying, do you need a website? Do you need something? I'm suddenly speaking on a stage and having 30 people come up to me after saying things like, how can we work with you?
Yeah, of course.
That creates a tension in the industry, which is corporate development, which makes other people want to acquire you. It makes you a target in a good way. And so even when I left the agency 5 years ago, I thought this is an asset I'd like to maintain, which I did. And now that I'm in this other startup, Thinkers One, with one of my business partners from the agency, we have 6 Pixels. So now it's just six Pixels of Separation, the Thinkers One podcast. And when I go out and speak, I'm no longer the president of Twist Image, which became Mirum. I'm the president or founder of Thinkers One, or the author of Control Alt Delete and 6 Pixels of Separation. So all of it is very connected, but the core of it is I really like writing long form articles and having long form conversations. So in that, a podcast makes sense to me. Writing articles makes sense to me. And then everything underneath it makes sense to me, which is I can speak for an hour or I can hop on a radio and do a hit.
Yeah. Okay. So many things are going through my mind just to break this down. Number one, the fact that you were able to speak about your personal brand objectively from the jump with your other partners in the room, what an advantage. Because I think that's probably, to me, for me personally, single-handedly the hardest thing. Like,
Sure.
what does Veronica Romney, the marketer, think about Veronica Romney, the brand? And to separate my identity, to split my identity is just, it's challenging. So like the fact that you were able to have this ping pong partners of ideation and creativity, but you're still talking about you, but not you, the real you, but the brand you. I mean, that's invaluable.
Well, one of the things that I would say, because I think when people hear thought leadership, they think self-promotion.
Sure.
So one of the things it really did is it grounded me away from look at me content.
Okay. Amen.
Look at me, I'm on stage. Look at me, I'm speaking for this. Look at me, I got invited here. Look at me, I have a book launch. That was never me. If you go back and look at the content around the launch of the first book, 6 Pixels of Separation, you'll see that it is 100% value to you, that you will be a better marketer if you watch or follow any of the content. I am not the hero. So the analogy that I would use is this. I want to be the journalist whose name is on the cover story of the magazine. I don't want my face to be the cover story of the magazine.
So much.
Everybody we know wants to be on the cover of the magazine.
Yeah.
I do not.
I mean,
I want the content to be there that's created by me.
Yeah.
And that I'm spending my time giving you value. I will throw up in my own mouth every time I have to self-promote a new episode of the podcast. But when I reframe it because this person has an incredible book out, or we had an incredible conversation about X, Y, Z, when I can frame the social post to promote it around that, all of that stress and pain go away.
Yeah, because you're no longer incongruent with yourself and your personal values.
Yeah, and look, at the end of the day, running Thinkers One, which is a platform that enables companies to buy basically bite-sized and personalized thought leadership. Yeah. I can tell you, as I'm marketing against these big name thought leaders, that there's not a lot of volume around them. Yeah. It's because there's a lot of thought leadership. Yeah. And so the attitude that I always bring is, if there's value there, I'm not really relevant. Like when I get asked to speak for the ridiculous fees I get paid to speak, I know that I'm actually external from that. It's a market that was created by the client and the speaking bureaus in the industry, not me. It might be if I were a celebrity. If you're a celebrity, it's a different world. Sure. And by the way, we've created great celebrities, whether it's a Gary Vaynerchuk or a Seth Godin, and I'd even argue someone like an Ann Handley has a level of celebrity to them. That's great too. And that's okay to leverage against how you build your brand and your identity. It just wasn't where I found myself. Yeah. I would rather float through the world anonymously, creating tremendous value and benefit from it because other people are growing, which speaks to what I meant by being a custodian of the brand.
Yeah, no,
it's very intrinsically connected. Some might hear this and think, what an idiot. All those years in, and you don't have 15 million followers and you're not out there doing all this stuff. And the answer is correct. And I'm okay with that. Yeah. Because we live in such a saturated world where this idea of an influencer isn't based off of your knowledge and how you deliver to an audience. It's a vocation. Yeah. Much in the same way, and I won't get political, but when you have politicians where it's a profession being a politician, you're going to have a different result than somebody who spent 8 months tilling the land and then 4 months helping their community grow as a politician, which is what politics were prior to us professionalizing it. So we professionalize this influencer or this keynote speaker, hashtag speaker life or whatever I see out there. And I won't belittle it. It's working for them. It's great. I just come at it from a very different approach.
There's a lot, again, so many things that you said. One of my favorite comedians of all time got one special on Netflix, and we recently saw him in Durham, here in North Carolina. And so somebody screamed from the back, like, "Where's your next special?" And he said, he's like, "I'll never have one, because at this point, it's all about who has the most followers that gets the next special, not the quality of the craft and the performer of said craft." So like, to your point, it's like, who can garner as much attention as like the new currency. But the other thing that I was thinking about, I'm like, oh, have you read the book $1 Trillion Coach, about the story of Bill Campbell? So the book was written after he passed.
So if you want to hear weird karma, we can definitely get into weird karma, which is, as soon as we're done recording this, I'm interviewing Alan Eagle for my podcast.
Okay, well, there we go.
who was the co-author of that book.
There we
Who's
go.
got a new book out
Yes.
about leadership. So yes, I've read that book. In
So
fact,
fun.
it's my next meeting.
Well, the reason that I bring this up is because, I mean, it's what I fantasize about. Like, here's this human that the book is written after his passing, and all of the good that he did in, this the best kept secret in a way, right? And so I think even for me, just being vulnerable, like, I really struggled to own the visionary Veronica version of me, like where I was worthy of leading my own business and mission versus being a marketing leader behind the scenes and doing the magic. And, was because I really loathed the idea that I would have to talk about where I live, what I wear, what my family looks like for you to want to follow me and buy from me, to be me. And it is so against my personal values. It's been very difficult, and it wasn't until the reframe that I didn't have to be the product that
We just clarified it for you.
Right.
There are academics.
Right.
There are incredible thought leaders that would never define themselves. I wouldn't even define myself as a professional speaker.
Right. Wow.
I would define myself as someone who has a deep interest in marketing, communications, innovation, disruption, how those all come together, how they change consumer behavior. The output of my work is I will do it on a stage, I will do it on the radio, I'll do it here in
Right.
a podcast.
Right.
That absolves me of this cult of personality. What's going to make Veronica interesting is not what you're doing, it's how you're thinking and adding value to the person who's receiving it. Now, I believe that those two ideas can coexist.
Okay.
So I'm not wrong. It's that you could be that other person who's just showing off and happy to do that and just out there in the world. And that works. There is an audience for that is monetized and is attention. And it might even be greater than the audience you're talking about. But this goes back to the Seth Godin, Kevin Kelly idea of, is it 1,000 true fans? Or I used to say this idea, I used to put forward this idea that it's not about how many, but about who. Seth Godin will talk about the fact that there's probably few people who've sold as many marketing books as Seth Godin, and he can float through an airport semi-anonymously because out of the millions of books he's sold in a world of billions and billions of people, and this is not something I'm saying about him, this is something he said to me on my show, that he is a fairly unknown person. But the people who do know him are really extremely valuable. And they have extreme power. And those 1,000 true fans that Kevin Kelly talks about, or the audience. So one is, I think there's something really valuable about that thought. But I also think in looking at it more broadly, I can look at someone like a Gary Vaynerchuk and say, wow, the discernible audience for what you think might be a multiple of what it really is. That he was able to transcend that and get people interested in whatever world of marketing he's encompassing at the moment. And you can not like the content, you can not like the character, you could love the character, can't get enough of the content, whatever it is, that's fine. But I do believe he's broken boundaries in terms of making even me self-reflect that my discernible market is probably much bigger than it is, or my perception of it rather. So it's an excuse for you to say, what type of content do you want to create? And it doesn't have to be about you. There's a ton of incredible writers that we don't really know what they look like, and they don't show off on social media, and they don't self-inflate their own tires. They're just there creating amazing content. And sometimes the content is so quality that they in and of themselves become somewhat famous for it. Malcolm Gladwell, Adam Grant, or whoever else you want to
great ones
take a look at.
Great examples. I hope that the marketers who are listening to this section of the podcast have like a collective, like, deep breath out.
What's easier than sharing how you feel about something?
For sure.
Right? So you could look at anything. I mean, and I can tell you this as someone who does weekly radio hits. They'll reach out and say, oh, today is the 1-year anniversary almost to the time that Elon Musk walked in the door and had his famous "let that sink in" tweet, and he took over Twitter. What do you think about that? As a marketer, you could have 5 to 10 really interesting positions that I think your clients would love to think about or be interested in. In a world where government employees can't have TikTok on their phone, what do you think that means as a marketer, where we know usage is through the roof, and that's where consumers are and spending all their time? just, or take even the industry you serve. You could work in the government as a marketing professional. How is that different when it's highly regulated, highly procurement based? It's really communications more than it is marketing. Should it have a brand? Should it not be about the brand, but about the message? I could come up with 1,000 different topics, not using ChatGPT, mind you.
Yeah.
Now, just imagine when you add in those
Those
tools,
new tools. Yeah.
how much more
The
effective.
speed. I was,
Yeah.
when I was with Amy Port in New Jersey,
I love those two.
the best.
Yeah.
I mean, they say a lot of brilliant things, but one of the things that has stuck with me for now years, I think it was when Michael was like, you don't have to say anything different to make a difference, which is his way of saying don't undervalue the weight of the messenger and a unique perspective.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly what you're alluding to, is just like people, as much as we pay for transformation and products and good offers, it's really people pay for a unique perspective that they resonate with somebody that is, that they have a connection to. And so like, as long as you in your personal branding can remain true to your unique perspective on whatever topic that you feel most passionate to have a commentary about, I think that will always resonate regardless of the platform you choose to distribute it on.
I'll extend the thinking a little bit
Please.
because I agree, but I would add,
Please.
if you can find yourself being a unique voice, I like that better. So if I reflect back on the early 2000s and blogging and podcasting and in that intersection of brands, consumer technology, and consumer behavior, I wasn't the only one, but I was one of a few. And it was truly unique in terms of the area that I occupied. As everybody flooded into it, the magic happens in what you're saying, which is you go from being unique to having a unique voice within that.
Yep.
If you can embrace that as a transfer, it's very powerful, because then you're finding a very specific niche where you are solely unique in. And over time, as it's validated through the quality, the content, how you're emerging with it, how you're distributing it, you can then move to being a unique voice in that, because there are others. And those others really are just a validation that what you're saying in that niche has merit and value.
Love it.
I said has merit, but it's value and merit.
I love it all. Like, this is easily one of my most favorite podcasts already, just so that you know.
Happy to be here.
I could literally talk to you forever, but you need to go off and do your own interview next. And so
with the $1 trillion code.
Yeah. Literally. That was not pre-planned for anybody listening. I want to afford you, this is something that we do for fun, and this is going to be really fun because you're also a podcast host. So I'm going to give you the last question of the podcast that you get to ask me whatever you would like to ask me that I don't know what you're about to say.
So let's stay on this trail of building your business and brand through content creation. You call personal branding. I would just call it as I called it. I'd love to know the one thing you did that was a spectacular failure. And then I'd love to know the one thing you did where it really surprised you at how well it played.
Okay. It's a really good question. And obviously talking about failures has lots of feels. I will tell you.
But tactical.
Yeah,
it's a tactical thing.
Yeah, tactical. Because, there's lots of personal brands that have blazed a trail before I. And so I did the mistake, which is, just copy success, and why not? And so everybody else has a YouTube channel, or everybody else they're prolific on Instagram story, you name it. What I have found about myself that I'm horrible at is speaking to a camera in the four walls of my office with no one, no energetic, anybody, not even the dog, to feed off of. I am as stiff and stale as you can imagine when it's just me and my phone, or me and a Canon camera. And I thought,
so that's a failure. Like, you did it a lot. And like, this is terrible.
Oh, yeah. And I've definitely heard. Yeah. It's just bad. It's not my best self. How about that way? Versus.
Well, let's agree.
Okay.
That me, so what people can't see is how I'm doing this right now, which is my laptop is down here, but my camera is right here. And I've been looking in the camera, I hope, the whole time. But really, if I wanted to see you, this would be me talking to you, actually. It wouldn't look like that. Yeah. To stare into a camera is the strangest content creation.
It's a black hole.
I've been doing this a long time. I still have so much admiration when I watch a news broadcaster just
Yes.
stare it down and they're making love to the camera, whatever they call it.
Yeah.
I am with, like, it is a very,
gift.
so in fairness to you,
Yeah.
it's a very strange thing to do.
Yeah, it's just very inorganic for me.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm Cuban descent, so I don't know if it's my Latin blood, but like whether I'm teaching 14-year-olds in Sunday school, or I'm in an auditorium of 1,000 people in Vancouver at the Unbounce conference, or I'm speaking to you, a party of one in this podcast, I can, like, it's like the ether. Like, I can feel this energetic response to having someone that I can bounce with, whether it's a big room or a small room. And so I have been surprised how I'm not intimidated by a stage. I'm not intimidated by a conversation with somebody of influence. Like, I really am my best self when in conversation with others. And that took me a long time to realize that, because, again, it's that spotlight. And I was very shy to own the spotlight for a myriad of reasons.
So is the negative also the positive one that you just connected to, or do you have another one where it's like, I did this and it worked spectacularly well?
No, that's been
pretty
my
cool.
big aha.
You're lucky. That's great that you can go from, like, I hate staring into a camera to I love staring into a camera when there's somebody else
on the
there.
other side. Mm-hmm.
That's pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Good for you.
Yeah. Well, it took me a second, but yeah. So now that this epiphany, this mental unlocking has occurred, everything, like, if you've read the book, The Big Leap, like, when you're in flow, right? Or Einstein time, when you're in your zone of genius, time just moves. It just flows through you energetically. I'd read those books before and I'm like, this is a load of garbage. What is this? Like, it's like,
and then when you do it, you're like, oh my God, I'm in flow.
And then I'm in flow. Like, so yeah, that's certainly been the last couple of years for me in my own business endeavors, my own personal branding endeavors, just me being me and sharing me with other people. How about that?
Works great for me.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Well, great question. Okay, Mitch, we will do all the things. We'll list all of your links in our show notes. But if somebody wanted to book you, read your book, connect with you further, I mean, you're a gift. How would you best have advised them to connect with you further?
Very easy to find. 6pixels.com, mitchjoel.com, Google my name, or check out thinkers1.com if you're interested in the actual work that I'm now doing. Yeah. And I really appreciate the time, and thank you so much. It was a great conversation.
Thank you for joining us on today's Rainmaker podcast. Marketers help other marketers. So if there's a marketer in your life who could really use a new perspective in a way that helps them advance their career, please pass this episode forward, share, leave us a review. Everything helps as we embark on helping as many marketers elevate themselves inside and out. You can always visit veronicarami.com for today's show notes, additional links to some free resources and tools for you to help you advance your career. You can always connect with us on social media at @ViaRomney if you want more behind the scenes or a way for us to connect personally. Until next time, my friends, make it rain.